Welcome to Bergen Stages, our entertainment magazine here at Bergen Community College. I'm Jim Bumgardner, your host. We use this program to highlight some events that happen around the campus and around our community. And today I have a very special guest, our director for our upcoming production, The Farnsworth Invention, Peter Campbell. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
It's so terrific to have you come and direct for us. It's been years in the making, and finally we have it happening. Yes. But before we get into talking about Farnsworth, I just want the audience to get to know you a little bit better. I know that you went to school in Michigan, undergraduate, correct?
That's right. I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan.
Oh, cool.
And then I went to University of Michigan in Ann Arbor for undergrad, and then I moved to New York to go to graduate school at Columbia a couple decades ago now, and started there, studying dramaturgy and criticism, and then ended up sticking around and doing the PhD program.
Were you a theater major in Michigan as well?
I was, yeah. I was a double major in drama and comparative lit.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I didn't act much in college. I had acted a bunch before college. But I started directing in college, and did for my senior thesis project, I directed a production of Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett, which was
a simple one.
Yeah, a simple one, yes. Well, there's 4 actors, but that's the only simple part about it.
That's about it.
But it was a lot of fun, and I was hooked, and knew I wanted to move to New York, and graduate school was a pretty good way to get here. So.
And your focus to come to New York was to be a director, or was it to get into education?
Well, originally it was to study. Well, I didn't really know, to be totally honest. I knew I wanted to be in the theater. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to get in there. So I actually started doing more scholarly stuff. I was studying dramaturgy, which is research in supported production, often working with new playwrights or working with older classic plays and giving directors tools and resources and actors.
Right. Can we elaborate a little bit more on that? Because I know some of our audience have no idea that there's somebody that does this at a production, especially those that are dated history plays and things like that.
Right.
So what exactly?
Well, dramaturgy has 2 sort of lines. One is new play dramaturgy, and that is people who are trained specifically to work with playwrights and directors on sort of refining and staging a play for the first time. If you've heard about like play readings or play workshops, there's usually someone who is a dramaturg or involved with dramaturgy, involved with those who's kind of like the playwright's friend, confidant, sometimes works with the theater that the playwright is premiering the new play at to help that play reach its potential. That's one strain. The other strain, which is probably the better known strain, is production dramaturgy, which is usually someone who helps the director, again, the theater, the designers, the actors, sort of research the world of a play. Right. So in Shakespeare productions, for example, there's a whole school of people who are specialists in doing dramaturgy for Shakespearean productions. If you go to like the Stratford Festival in Canada or the Royal Shakespeare Company or the Public Theatre when they do the Shakespeare Festival in the park in the summer, they have a whole department of dramaturgical research that focus on giving the director and the actors all the tools, resources, historical stuff that might be useful. Critical stuff, so things that other scholars have said over the past 400 years about Shakespeare and about its production. Things about verse that, for Shakespeare specifically, that you might not know.
Right.
So that's how I actually got in to graduate school studying dramaturgy. And what happened, and was really an extension of some of my work as an undergrad, was I was fascinated with ancient Greek tragedy, with classical work, and the adaptation of it for contemporary people.
Okay.
So I was in a production when I was a sophomore in college of Lysistrata, which is a comedy by Aristophanes. It's very bawdy. It's all about women going on a sex strike in order to try to stop a war. Right. It's during the Peloponnesian War. So stop a war between the Athenians and the Spartans.
Right, right.
The women go on a sex strike from both cities, and the war ends up stopping. So it was a contemporary adaptation, and it was also a musical adaptation. It was very ambitious, and it was hysterical, and the audiences loved it, and it was great to be a part of it, and it was really illuminating because it made me think very differently about these old ancient plays and how they spoke to us today.
Right.
And so I really grasped onto that, and when I got to graduate school, I started to study that more closely.
There was a production of Lysistrata that was on Broadway, Lysistrata Jones.
Yes, that's right.
This musical that was set in a high school. It didn't quite work for me,
Yeah.
but I thought it was a clever and I love that being done in college. It's just so strange when you see it on Broadway, and it's like, okay, that's not quite where it needed to be.
But there's a good example of that sort of adaptation for a Roman play, which is a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum,
Right.
which is actually a very contemporary adaptation of a Plautus play, which again is from, the 1st century BCE, right? It's from more than 2,000 years ago. But in that case, Sondheim adapts it. They're dressed in togas, but it's very contemporary, right? It's language, it's music, obviously. So I started studying those kinds of adaptations in graduate school, and then started doing them myself, both writing and directing.
Writing, yes. I know you're a playwright too.
I've written a half dozen plays, but I'm usually writing them in anticipation of producing them, directing them myself.
Okay.
I have had a couple of commissions from theaters where they've asked me to write a play, and I've written a play for them, and they've produced that play, which is great. One in Chicago and one in New York.
Oh, that is great.
But for the most part, when I'm writing material that I'm planning on directing myself. And again, in most cases, there's a couple things I've been working on recently, but in most cases, they've been adaptations of Greek plays.
You don't happen to have one of The Clouds, do you?
I don't. No.
I just read it over break, and I just thought, oh my gosh, I'd love to see an adaptation of The Clouds. We'll talk about that at a later time.
Well, most of my adaptations have actually been of the tragedies, of the more serious work. I've just been more attracted to that generally.
Sure.
But yes.
Yeah. And now you're at Ramapo College.
Yes.
And you're on the theater faculty.
Yes.
Teaching.
I teach the theater history courses. I teach the playwriting courses. I direct there fairly regularly, not every year, but every other year. I also teach a lot of dramatic literature courses. I teach a course in African American theater. I teach a course in experimental theater. So I teach those kind of courses.
And you have a nice theater, not just faculty, but theater majors, a group of theater majors?
Yes, we have a great group of theater majors, yes.
Yeah.
A lot of acting majors, but also a lot of design and tech majors. We have great facilities there at Ramapo College, the Berry Center, which is a relatively new building.
And I've seen a few things there, and I've just loved the performances. Yeah. And it's great that between Bergen Community College and Ramapo, we've got this relationship that some of our students will graduate and come over to Ramapo, which is wonderful, and I hope to keep this relationship continuing to happen
absolutely.
there.
We have a lot of Bergen transfers who come up and are actors, technicians, all sorts of things, and are really vital to our program.
Which is great. Then they finish with their BA after their associate's degree from us, get their bachelor's from you, which is, and then on from there.
Yes.
That's just looking at your program, you're directing something there this coming spring as well.
I am, in April. I'm actually directing 2 short plays by a writer named Young Jean Lee, who's a Korean-American writer who's really sort of one of the stars of the kind of international experimental theater scene. And she's writes these 2 very small but very surprising plays that are about how we kind of think of ourselves in the world. And they're philosophical, and they sound a little abstract, but they're actually very intimate and very uncomfortable at times. And I'm really excited to start working on that as soon as I'm done with this.
As soon as you're finished with this one, you'll move on to that one. Yes. And then, and as a director, what do you look for when you audition actors? What is your... If I was auditioning for you, what would you want me as an actor to be ready to do for you at the audition?
I like energy. Energy and dynamic. That's really important. You can't always tell someone's craft in an audition, especially when you're working with college students. Some of whom have had a lot of experience, and others who haven't necessarily had much experience. But you get a lot from energy and the sort of dynamic of what they're doing in the space. And you can, I don't know, I like to think I can sort of tell, even though this person necessarily hasn't been the star of every play in high school, that if they show the interest and they show that energy,
there's something there that
that they have a lot to work with. So that's something, especially working with college students, that I really look for is an energy and a kind of excitement, and maybe something that they're not even aware of, where they're kind of maybe a little like jumpy in their audition, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that they're not quite sure what they're doing. But that's something that can be harnessed into something that, for an audience, is really exciting.
And a lot of kids think, oh, I have to know what I'm doing before I even get there. And it's like, no, that's why we have rehearsals. That's why you have a director. That's why we're focusing on all these different things.
And one of the things that I focus on, especially working with college students, is the professional kind of work ethic that an actor has to have.
What does that mean?
Well, I mean, it's, and again, this is something that I deal with on all levels, but rehearsals are just a part, right? They're like the tip of the iceberg in terms of what an actor does. A rehearsal is a chance to work with your fellow actors and the director to sort of set things. But a lot of the work happens at home. It happens on your own. You have to become intimate with that text. You have to know it. You have to memorize your lines. You can't expect to just show up for rehearsal, you know,
and do all your work
3
at
hours
that
a night
moment.
and get everything done. And that's something that I encourage, right? That I try to communicate. That if you come to rehearsal and you haven't done anything since the last rehearsal, I mean, homework is probably not the best analogy because nobody likes homework, but you have a lot of work to do. And a lot of people talk about, well, actors don't really work that much. Well, the good ones do. They might not be on set or at rehearsal 70 hours a week,
But there's something
but they're
going on.
always working. And they're, you know, maybe they're reading a book about their character, right? If it happens to be someone who actually existed.
Right.
Maybe they're watching old plays or reading or watching old films that are somehow influencing that.
Right, or from that period that they can kind of tap into
That's right.
style
That's right.
Of the characters. That's yeah. And you do, and I know this from meetings that you and I have had, you do something interesting vocally with your actors. So you working on their vocal technique. What is your training for that, and what are you doing?
Right. Well, in graduate school, I had the real luck and the real pleasure to work with Anne Bogart, who's the head of the City Company, which stands for the Saratoga International Theater Institute.
Okay.
And at the City Company, they work with two different kind of training techniques. One is called viewpoints, which Anne has developed with another director named Tina Landau, and which focuses a lot on movement and movement in space. So it really is an opportunity for actors to kind of to play and to feel how they exist and how they're present amongst each other, and then of course with the audience. And the second piece of that, which is where the vocal training comes in more, is in the training by a Japanese director, contemporary Japanese director and actor trainer named Tadashi Suzuki. And his training focuses very much on finding grounding with the earth through your body, and then getting power from that earth and bringing it up through your legs, your lower body and your torso, and turning it into breath and the power of voice. So, you know, my students, which this is new for all of them, but we've already had a couple rehearsals where it's kind of like a martial art, right? It's based actually in the same traditions as martial arts.
Right.
So they're stomping, and I'm banging a stick to sort of order them to do certain things, and then you add text to that. So their text, the idea is that their text becomes physically attached to them through this kind of process.
What a great experience for them.
I hope so.
Wow,
I hope so.
Yeah. And I think we've gone to theater and it's been so microphoned within an inch of its life that it's great that you're working on something that I know 20, 30 years ago we had that training and to be able to project and to fill a 6,000 seat auditorium without all that microphone. So it's, and what's nice is that you're in the Inter-Hall Lab Theater for this production, so it's an intimate space to begin with. But I think our actors, and I know that as a director working with them, is that projection has been an issue, and it's just great to know that you're there to feed in on that that training that they need. So that's a great segue. We're going to get into talking about our production of The Farnsworth Invention by Aaron Sorkin that you're directing. So we're going to take a very quick break and come back and tap into some of your ideas and where you're heading with this production. So please stand by one more second. We will be back to talk with Peter Campbell about The Farnsworth Invention. Thank you, and come right back.
After a car accident, Linda Davis needed CPR. Bill Hamilton needed temporary shelter when a fire destroyed his home. During an operation, Haley Reynolds needed a blood transfusion.
Excuse me, may I go into that room, please?
Next year, revenue growth again will be a focus. Top priority.
Thank you for giving me blood.
Thank you for giving me shelter.
Thank you for saving my life.
Support the Red Cross and change a life, starting with your own.
Before a disaster turns your family's world upside down, it's up to you to be ready. Get a kit, make a plan, be informed today. Learn how at ready.gov.
Hi, and welcome back to Bergen Stages, our entertainment magazine here at Bergen Community College. Our special guest today is Peter Campbell, coming to us from Ramapo College, but he's here to direct our production of the Farnsworth invention that was written by Aaron Sorkin. So thanks again, Peter, for being here. Just to talk a little bit about the play itself, I love Aaron Sorkin's writing. And many of us know him from writing A Few Good Men is probably his most famous piece that our audience will know. What is this writing? As a playwright, how do you find this writing?
Oh, it's very exciting. I mean, the language is very exciting. If you're familiar with Sorkin's work, A Few Good Men, obviously, but there's also The West Wing, and then more recently, The Newsroom. Yeah. And you can actually see this play as a kind of, almost like a preface to The Newsroom in many ways. It deals with some of the same concerns. But I think the highlight of his work is really the dialogue, the pace of it. There's almost like cliches and jokes about Sorkin's dialogue nowadays. It's fast-paced, things move quickly, people are often moving and talking at the same time. There's lots of walking and talking. The West Wing and The Newsroom, if you watched any of them, there's never, there's very few scenes where someone's sitting in an office. Usually they're getting up from an office, they're walking down the hall with somebody, and then they cross back with somebody else, and right. So
a true slice of life. I mean, it really does capture what we do.
And this play has that kind of energy. It's in dozens of different places that are defined only by the actors in the space.
A movement to this
because it's quick. It moves too fast. I mean, we're in a lab, we're in an office, we're on the street, we're fixing a car, we're back in the lab, we're in New York, we're in San Francisco. So it moves like that. And the dialogue moves like that as well.
And I fell in love with this production when I saw it on Broadway a few years ago, and so I'm so glad that we're doing it. But can you tell our audiences a little bit about the subject matter, who Philo Farnsworth was, and where we're taking them on this play?
Sure. Well, the play is actually set up as kind of like a dueling memory play. It's about two guys. There's Philo Farnsworth, who is, for all intents and purposes, the inventor of the television. Although the play itself is about that very problem and debate. And his sort of, the other narrator, the other person who's the major character is David Sarnoff, who was the president of RCA for decades, and was the person who actually made the television become the central media thing around the world.
Right.
So this play is about the battle between them, the struggles between them, as Philo Farnsworth in the 1920s as a really young man. He actually comes up with the original plan for the television when he's 14 years old in 1921, and then actually gets the first picture in 1926 when he's 19 years old. Despite the fact that there were, brilliant scientists in America and Europe who had been working on it for 20 years, right? One of the sort of bases of the story is the sort of irony that this uneducated, although absolutely brilliant, young man with no resources.
Utah farm boy?
He grew up in Utah and Idaho, right? Ends up creating this thing that hundreds of scientists with huge research budgets and the support of multinational companies haven't invented.
All the money,
right? They need his brilliance and his luck to end up getting what ends up being the television, which is sort of invented in the late 1920s, although it obviously doesn't become a major factor in the U.S. until after World War II in the 1940s.
So naively, he has this invention and he invites people to come see what he's done.
Right, because that's what scientists do. Right. You share your work. This is still true. But what happens is that he shares his work with people who take it and then end up fighting over the legal battles, the copyright battles. Right. The patent battles.
And Sorkin kind of controlled radio in its sort of way, didn't he? The West Coast.
Sarnoff did.
Sarnoff.
Yes. No, that's all right. No, Sarnoff actually is the is really kind of like the original purveyor of radio. At the same time, in 1921, that Farnsworth is thinking about the television, Sarnoff is expanding what radio was, which in the 19-teens was a person-to-person communication.
Right.
It was like a CB, right? And what Sarnoff envisioned and actually made happen was to make it a huge, massive entertainment source. So in 1921, the first sort of massive entertainment venture that happens over radio is this boxing match between Jack Dempsey and Georges Carpentier, which, if anyone's been watching Boardwalk Empire, in the first season, that actually happens in the first season. It's in the backdrop.
Right.
They're trying to figure out where they should put the receiver for the radio so that the people can hear it. So yes, he creates in the late 1920s from RCA NBC, the National Broadcasting Company, which then of course becomes the leading radio outlets into the 1930s, and that eventually becomes one of the first.
So having the control over that, he wants the control of the other as well.
That's
so
right.
I know that he sends, is it a Japanese scientist? No, Russian scientist
yes.
over who kind of takes the idea and draws it out and brings it back with him.
Right,
And
well,
this
it's
is where-
Vladimir Zworykin, who actually, again, historically, has been working on television for 20 years. He was working on television when he was still in Russia, and it actually leaves Russia during the revolution because he's not seen as being sympathetic.
Right.
So he then moves to the United States and is taken on by General Electric, Westinghouse, which is bought by RCA, and is working on television for literally 20 years and has not figured it out.
Come up with this thing.
And when he does eventually meet Farnsworth in the play, Farnsworth willingly shares his work with him because, again, that's what scientists
Proud
do.
of it.
They both have patents. They're different. Zworykin's is earlier. Zworykin's patented his idea for television in 1923. Farnsworth's patent doesn't happen until 1927, so that's where the legal battles begin. And the question of, well, which idea is the one that is the invention of television,
Right.
becomes what the legal arguments are about.
So obviously, this play has quite a historical background to it, which is exciting. Is there a resolution? Do we make a decision? Is a decision made, or is the audience left to say, who did do it?
Well, one of the interesting truths about the history is that the ownership or the invention of television is something that's never really resolved. It keeps going back and forth. There are lawsuits. And eventually the company, the Philo Farnsworth Television Company, gets sort of eaten up by RCA. So the who invented television question is a little bit of a red herring. Sorkin is more interested really in what do we use these things for, right? When they become invented, when radio becomes invented, when television becomes something, when it becomes a fact, what do we use it for? What's it for? And Sarnoff is incredibly interested in this. He actually is, he wrote memos and spoke publicly about it for decades and decades. And Sarnoff really thought that radio and then television should be for the public good, right? And what he is upset about over the course of the play is the fact that radio and then eventually television, as soon as advertising becomes something that's viable, radio gets taken over by it, right? And although the play doesn't really get to televisions in every home, the same thing is what Sarnoff fears will happen to television. And in that, he and Farnsworth are actually on the same page. They both think that this is something that has incredible value, that if it's used, in the right ways, can be something that moves our civilization forward. But it also has the potential, if it's not used in the right ways, to be destructive and to be unhelpful. And again, that's a theme that you can see in a lot of Sorkin's work.
We've got the internet now too, that we just themes today that people are constantly talking about. These, what is that phone in your pocket? Why are you looking at little kitties? Why aren't you researching something with it? So it's just an interesting opportunity. So great. So this play is now in rehearsal, and so you take us on a journey through this 20 years of his life, 30 years of his life?
It's really focused on about 15 years,
Yeah.
right? From 1920 to the early 1930s. And, you know, there are all sorts of historical things that happened during that time. I already mentioned the big introduction of radio with the boxing match, you know. The Great Depression begins.
Right.
Prohibition is there. So all of these historical factors play an important role in how
the development of it all.
and how the play plays out.
And so now you've got, as you had said, it goes to so many different locations, and we're proud to have brought in Kate Hevner in to design the set. What is she doing with this set to help bring the story that you want to bring to light? How is she physically doing that?
Well, one of the things we've talked about is that we want the presence of technology to be palpable, right? So when the audience comes in, they're going to see technology, but they're not necessarily going to see historical technology. They're going to see the real technology that we use
Today.
Right. So we're going to see televisions today, right? There is no television in the world of the play yet.
Hasn't been invented.
Exactly. And one of the reasons we're doing that is to have the audience consider, as they're watching, how media, how television, how these images affect them, right? I mean, how do we view differently when we're viewing an actor, a live actor on stage, versus that actor's head in a small box, right, on a television?
And where does our attention go? Are we really watching that actor there, or are you looking at the talking head?
Yes, that's right. But it's also because media, right, television, radio, affects how we perceive the world.
Right.
So having a sort of concrete way of showing that, right? Sometimes the actors will be speaking in microphones, so their voices will be mediated through sound. Sometimes they'll be on video, so we'll see them on camera on televisions, right? How do we look differently? How do we listen differently when media is involved? Because of course we do. But again, as you already mentioned, with our phones and internets and computers nowadays, we don't necessarily think about how we look differently and how we hear or listen differently.
So this play is going to make us do that. What you're doing with it at this point.
Yes,
and
the
what
idea
Kate
behind the
have
production.
collaborated on is doing that.
The idea behind the production is that we will look at it and think about how those media things really affect how we look at the world, how we see the world.
Right, and that's and Kate's idea with the set is also bringing in a lot of multimedia. So we're using a lot of the multimedia people here on campus to talk about, you know, how to make these televisions and everything sync up correctly for the show. And then we've got Patrick Ryan, who's working on the sound and sound effects and switching from audio to the video portions of the show. And then we got some costumes. I know we've got Marina Talley coming in to do some costumes, and so you're kind of going back to our original conversation of talking about period and period appropriate. So she's working on period pieces for the actors to wear.
Yes.
And then Jared Saltzman's coming in to do light, which I think you were talking about, as Aaron Sorkin writes, that you move from one area to the other. These lights will probably enhance that
yeah,
movement.
I mean, light, which again is actually the opening monologue of the play is actually about how light is what makes us see, right? The reflection of light is what we see. If there's no light, we don't see. So the way that Jared and I have talked about light is to guide us, right? So we're not going to have a bunch of set changes. We're not going to have a bunch of flats being rolled in and out. It's moving too quickly.
Right.
So we're going to use light and bodies, the bodies of the actors, to create those spaces.
Create the space.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. So you're in rehearsals now and getting ready for our opening night, which is coming up before we know it there. We also have a very special evening, is on February the 28th, that Thursday evening. We're going to do an audience talkback. So the audience is welcome to join us. Come see the play that evening, or just come back when the play is over with, and you'll be able to talk to yourself. You'll be there representing the theater side of it and the playwriting side of it. Mark Altschuler will be there as a creative writer, and also one more person, Andy Badish, will be coming in to talk about this as his media ideas of what he teaches in this. So I can't believe our time is up. This is just so much to talk about, but it's an exciting play. I know we've talked a lot of historical significance, but I think you and the audience are just going to love this particular production. I'm so excited to have you here, Peter, to bring this to light and bringing the talents that you have to our students as well. So thank you so much. Please come and see. On the screen right now is how to get tickets to come see the Farnsworth Invention. It's in the Interhall Lab Theater, the small black box theater on our campus. So please come and see us at Bergen Stages. Thank you.